that single charting on Billboard, because Spotify does report to Billboard. They actually have their own chart on Billboard. It's called the viral chart. So they, I don't know if it's only based on Spotify numbers, but there's clearly a direct connection because we charted, I think, top 5 on there. And that led to a major label deal. Peace, what's going down, everyone? This is the Music Entrepreneur Club podcast. My name is DJ Payne 1. His name is Dame Ritter, and this is episode number 13. Of course, it's 13. Everything is some kind of symbol that harkens back to the evil Illuminati conspiracies within the music business, because that's what we represent with this podcast, 110%. What's going on, Dame? How you been feeling? We took a week off. Are you invigorated?
Nah, man, I wish we wouldn't have. I know that we said we were going to switch to every other Monday. We changed our mind again, so we're back to every Monday. There was just too much stuff that happened that I wanted to talk about. I feel like there's always a lot of things that happen in the music business. There's never a shortage of topics. So let's keep it rocking, man, every week. Sorry for that blip in the Matrix. So we'll keep it rocking every Monday from now on.
So you use words like blip in the Matrix, and then you wonder why people have all these crazy conspiracy theories about us. Anyway, kicking things off, I do want to preface what I'm about to say and maybe some of our conversation about Spotify with just a quick story, because, and hopefully I can get Ted Park on here, but years ago, this kid, Ted Park, from my city, he recorded a song. He and I recorded a song here at my house. We didn't really have a plan for it. It was meant to be an intro to an album that we were going to work on. We put it on Spotify, no plan, no advertising, nothing. And somehow it was playlisted on Fresh Finds. That was kind of the first domino to fall. And that all led up to us kind of having some semi-viral success for that one song on Spotify, which led to that single charting on Billboard, because Spotify does report to Billboard. They actually have their own chart on Billboard. It's called the viral chart. So they, I don't know if it's only based on Spotify numbers, but there's clearly a direct connection because we charted, I think, top 5 on there. And that led to a major label deal. And that was really the song that Ted used as a springboard for all the success that he's finding now. So that was completely accidental. And so I'm really on the fence about Spotify, because I see that there are songs that everybody just seems to love, and that's the nature of music. You never know what people are going to like, and the song that you might think is the greatest song in the world, people just might not respond well to it. But there are a lot of musicians who put their music on Spotify and they expect that kind of scenario to happen where you get playlisted, you go viral, that kind of thing. And at this point in time, it almost feels like Spotify in a weird way is being looked at the way, MySpace or YouTube was being looked at. I just feel like it's moving at a faster pace, in the regard that, there were the Soulja Boys and Sean Kingstons of MySpace that blew up off MySpace, and then there were the early YouTube personalities that blew up off YouTube, and now people are trying to recreate that success or expect those same results later in the game, even though things have moved so far past that era, to the point where it's not impossible to. But these social media sites and YouTube is a streaming platform, kind of like Spotify, but YouTube is like a search engine disguised as a streaming platform, whereas Spotify is a streaming platform. So I think it's still easier to break into YouTube than it is to Spotify and achieve some kind of moderate success. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but I understand why artists are frustrated with the Spotify landscape, and it does seem a lot less transparent than these other platforms. And it also seems like, all of these platforms are owned by big companies. all these platforms give the big labels and the big artists preferential treatment. That's just how it is. I think Instagram and YouTube and the more searchable social media sites, the more search friendly social media sites are just a little bit more, for lack of a better term, democratic than Spotify. I don't know how you feel about it, Dame. I'm just musing because I'm not a huge Spotify user. I haven't really jumped into that pool all that deeply yet.
Well, at the end of the day, I mean, I know everybody wants a shortcut, right? Whether it's Spotify or YouTube or whatever, you know. But I think the last statistic I heard is only like 17% of total plays on Spotify come from playlists, right? So the safer bet, but the harder thing to do, is to build a core following, have a catalog of music, put out music consistently, and have that core following like stream your music on a consistent basis, right? That's where you're really going to find a lot of value, you know, if you have a strong catalog and a strong core audience. So people that are expecting to just, you know, get lucky and find themselves on a playlist, that's the lotto strategy. You know, it could happen. I mean, it happens more often than hitting the lotto, but you know, there's not much of a foundation there, right? And you're betting on luck as opposed to having a solid brand, solid story, building a core following that streams your music over and over again. That's ultimately what you should be shooting for. And if some playlists come along the way, that's great. That just puts more fuel on the fire, and gets things building even faster. So that's what I always try to encourage artists to focus on. Playlists are cool, you know, but even if you do get playlisted, it's hard to turn those streams into fans, right? Because there's not like, oh, I'm going to listen to this song and then there's their Instagram link, I'm going to follow them now. A lot of times people are just listening, they like the song, they don't even care what your name is if it's just found on a playlist, unless they keep hearing your voice time and time again. Then they might, you know, follow up and find you on social media and actually become a fan. So, you know, I definitely think that the playlist stuff, it can help, you know, but I think too many people are trying to just find luck in getting on a playlist as opposed to putting in the hard work.
So let me talk about an article that you posted. And I think articles like these are part of the problem, because it does seem like there's this single platform narrative out there where people feel like if you can't make it on one platform, the game is rigged. And I understand the frustrations. The thing about artists is we have an emotional connection to our music. So if we upload 5 songs to Spotify that we absolutely love, and they don't end up going viral or getting playlisted or, you know, whatever the case is, we start feeling a way about the platform rather than maybe our overall strategy or our sound or whatever. Because that's a lot harder. It's easier to just blame the platform. And I think all of us as artists are guilty of that kind of thought. But, and I don't know why do you like Rolling Stone so much, Dame? Or do you just share their articles a lot?
I mean, I share a lot of articles. I mean, Rolling Stone just happens to be one of, I get a couple of newsletters sent to me. One comes on a daily basis, and this is why I would encourage people listening to this to subscribe to ASCAP's Daily Brief. They will send you a daily email of the top articles in the music business. So subscribe to that, ASCAP's Daily Brief. And then also my guy, Jesse Kirschbaum, has, it doesn't come out daily. I don't even think it comes out weekly, but it's called Beats and Bites. And he also shares a lot of the, you know, the top news, the top trends and topics that are happening in the music industry. And that's how I find a lot of the articles that I post. But yeah, it's not.
Where did this one come from? Was this Jesse or was this ASCAP that shared?
I think this was in the ASCAP Daily Brief.
Oh, that's a damn shame. All right, so it's this Rolling Stone. I'm being so harsh on Rolling. Ever since you're
Old Town Road article, and then you want to talk about the article. So it did its purpose, right? It you know, they did what they set out to do, is to get the attention, and now we're talking about it on the podcast. So you can't go in too hard on them.
Yeah.
Right?
From a strictly journalistic perspective, I think it's a really bad article. The headline.
Then we shouldn't be talking about it, but let's get to the point. What was the article about?
Well, it's about the narrative. I don't want to talk about the article. I just think the article speaks to a lot of people's frustrations. But the article's title is How Artists Are Gaming Streaming Searches to Score Hits. So right there, they're setting it up as this kind of reveal to tell you a secret about how artists who are probably not famous or signed to begin with, I mean, that's the implication, are using these Spotify hacks to go viral on the platform, right? And right away they start with this really terrible story about an artist named Noah Gunderson who released the album by the same name as the Taylor Swift album on the same day, and people freaked out. So that really has nothing to do with the spirit of the article. And then it goes on to talk about a producer who named a song titled Post Malone because, I mean, sometimes songs are named after people, like Future's Tony Montana or Post Malone's Jackie Chan, and that's somehow supposed to prove the point that if artists use the title of an already popular artist, their song's going to go viral. And then
so I don't think that they're saying that it works every time, right? But I think this is similar to what like Soulja Boy used to do with his uploads on YouTube. You know, title it something else, you click on it, and then it's actually Soulja Boy. So it's similar, and it works sometimes, right? So we just need to. What I like about the article is like, you know, I don't encourage everybody to do this. I encourage everybody to understand what's happening so they can leverage a form of this, and hopefully coupled with dope content, because I think at the end of the day, if you don't have dope content, you know, these gaming strategies won't work. But it has worked before, so I think it's worth, and it's working now, so I think it's worth talking about.
But I think it's also worth looking into who these people are that this article is talking about. So, for example, Sam Felt is a DJ. He's the guy that has a song called Post Malone. This is the first time I've ever even, I don't know much about that world, but he signed to Spinning Records. In the EDM world, Spinning Records is like Def Jam. So he's not by any means some bedroom producer that just blew up because he named his song Post Malone. This dude, I mean, the Post Malone video came out earlier this summer. It's already almost at 5 million views, and this is the official music video. It's on Spinning Records. He has a pretty big team behind him. And then the article goes on to name Black Bear and his controversial Hot Girl Bummer. But are we going to act like Black Bear didn't have a hit single last year as well as a gold-selling album?
So maybe for these artists that are already established, that are using, you know, common phrases or terms, or, you know, terms that are searched a lot, it just puts more fuel on it, right? So you can't expect their level of success. However, if you are using some of these terms in your music, you probably are going to appear in more searches. And again, I'm not encouraging people, because I think the more people that do this, you know, if everybody has a song called Hot Girl Summer, like, they're going to put an end to this somehow, some way. Like, if everybody starts doing it, like, there's going to be some way to filter out, you know, the people that are just imposters trying to name things a certain way, right? But I don't think their point is disproven just because it's artists that are established, because we've seen it with unestablished artists have varying degrees of effectiveness, right? So it's a very real thing that you can do in terms of like being more intentional about how you're naming things, being more intentional about what you put in the keywords, being more intentional about this stuff, I think is smart and can help a lot of artists, especially if you're dope and have something real going on, right? So I don't see any issue with the article. You're definitely more skeptical about it than I am. I think it's something to really think about, because it's, you know, there's
I just didn't see a single example that actually supports the premise of the article in the article. I mean, all the artists that put out these songs presumably were gonna have success based on them already being top selling artists in their genre. So I don't.
But I wouldn't. So if they used examples that don't work for you, but it's still. Do you feel like it's not an effect? Do you feel like it's not happening with artists that maybe aren't as established, right? Like Lil Nas X based his name off of something that was like he came up with his name like based off of like Google Analytics, right? This stuff is very real, and I want artists to think about it as they're putting together their projects and their songs. You know, not to necessarily to be all that, but I think it's something to think about when you're naming things and thinking about what's being searched right now, the most searched terms, because it could help the promotion of your project.
It certainly could. I wanted to see an example of it actually working based on Spotify's algorithm, and I didn't get that from the article. I mean, if I were an artist with very little experience reading this article, I would say, okay, cool. I'm going to name every song on my upcoming album, even the song about my deceased grandmother and all the pain I felt when I was at her funeral. I'm going to call that Young Thug, and I'm going to call the other record Katy Perry, and I'm going to call the intro, which was originally titled Letter to My Daughter, I'm going to rename that to 6ix9ine's Trial Footage. And if you know what I mean? It's just, I don't think that's how it works.
But I bet, I mean, again, it's going to depend on the quality of those songs, but I bet if you did that, you know, just based off the title alone, it would get more clicks. Now, turning those clicks into actual fans, that's a process, and that's going to require a lot, and it's going to require good quality. You know, and eventually I don't think you want to do that. You don't want to be known as, you have to have a plan for, like, okay, how do I start with these tricks, but I want to be a legit, well-known artist. You know, Soulja Boy flipped it, and now, you know, he became a legit, you know, superstar, you know, a legend in the internet era. So I think you have to have a longer term plan for it. I don't think it's something that you just continuously do for the rest of your career either.
I think you talked about this, though. Once somebody uses a strategy, that strategy kind of dies out. It's like you can't really recapture that moment. No one's gonna do what Soulja Boy did ever again.
Maybe not to that scale, but I still think, like, you know, keyword searches, popular searches, that's, to me, that's not necessarily going to go away. I think if everybody started naming their songs Young Thug, Spotify will come up with a way to filter the people that are just using that term out. Like, so it's a strategy that I think you can still use today, but as more people start to do that and try to game the system, they're going to come up with ways to shut that down.
Yeah, I'm naturally skeptical of any article that has to do with any of this stuff. It's because it's being presented as this insider information that's giving advice to upcoming artists, and not everyone's at Black Bear's level. And the people who are at Black Bear's level probably aren't reading this article because they probably have a team of people strategizing their next move. So is the spirit of the article something that is helpful, as in getting artists to think about their SEO when it comes to their releases? Yeah, of course. Should artists think about the current and upcoming cultural trends with regard to releasing their music or creating their music, insofar as it's still authentic to what they're doing? Yeah, of course. I don't think it's a hack, though. I don't think it's a viral hack, but that's just me.
I mean, that's ultimately what I took from it. You know, of course, you know, we create these headlines and they're trying to get people to click on the article to read it, but essentially that's what I took from it, and it's a very real thing. And maybe they should have used a different example that's closer to the experience of a lot of people listening to this podcast. But I still think it's a quality article, and that's why I shared it.
Well, and that's why I clicked on it, because you shared it. I don't trust anybody but Dame.
Nice. So did we kill that one? Are we moving on to the next topic?
I think it killed itself.
Okay, dope. So we got tagged recently in a post in the comments of a post from an artist named Estero. I think that's how you pronounce it.
Yeah, Estero. She's dope. She's Canadian.
And basically what she was doing was kind of complaining about the money she was making from her streams. Like, she was being transparent. She showed screenshots of her TuneCore, and she showed how much she has made over the past 7 years. And essentially it broke down to like $8,000 a year. And she's basically saying Spotify needs to start paying artists more because I can't live off this, right? And I think that's a complaint that we've heard oftentimes from a lot of artists. I think the complaints are skewed towards the artists that existed prior to Spotify. And ultimately, I'd love to have her on one of our live sessions, and I've actually made contact with her, and I'm hoping to have her on one of our live sessions. But I'm on the opposite side of this argument completely, because, and I need to get the data to back this up, but I believe that there are more independent artists today than ever before, right? That's what I believe, and I think there's data to support this. I'm going to find it, but I think there's more independent artists today than there ever have been in the history of music. And if I can get the data to support that, I'm going to talk about it next week. But I'm pretty sure that's the case. And if that is the case, how is that happening, right? Like, if these tools are available to us now, Spotify, YouTube, so now that we have more opportunity, I think that the game has just changed in terms of how do you capture that revenue to make a living as an artist. And I think a lot of that revenue is on Spotify for many artists, because I know a lot of them. He had about 50,000 monthly Spotify listeners, which is not terrible, but I know a lot of artists that have, a lot of independent artists that have way more, right? And that's just one metric. A lot of times we have to dig deeper into like the monthly listeners thing, because you might have 50,000 monthly listeners, something and maybe they all listen to your song one time, right? Yeah. And maybe another artist might have 50,000 monthly listeners, because a monthly listener is a unique user, right? That one person could have listened to 10 songs, they could have listened to one song, but at the end of the day, that's just one monthly listener, right? So her audience, she has 50,000 monthly Spotify listeners. Each one of them could be listening to one song for the month, or they could listen to 100 songs for that's going to matter in terms of the number of streams. But 50,000 is not a big number relative to many other artists that I see and work with. So I think that there's some work that she needs to do on the Spotify platform to get her numbers up. And then when I looked at how often she releases music, because that's definitely a game changer from the pre-Spotify days to now, is you have to be more consistent, right? You have to have a catalog of music. You have to be putting out music consistently to remind your fans to revisit your catalog, to save your songs, to playlist your songs. You need a reason for fans to keep coming back to your catalog, and putting out music does that. The last album that she put out was in 2012, right? That's a long ass time. We're in 2019. You haven't put out an album since 2012, right? And then I think she's put out a few singles. She put out a single like 2017, and then she put out something this year. But I think it's going to be very hard for her to have an argument if that's the pace in which you're releasing music, because that's not going to fly, right? So that's probably the biggest. That's one of the things that I would have an issue with how she's moving today. And then the other thing is just kind of her social media. She's got 9,000 followers. Again, same thing. Like my 9,000 can be different from her 9,000. Her 9,000 could be all the way locked in. Every one of them might buy her album. I don't know. But for a lot of artists, only a fraction of their followers are actually going to buy something, right? So if you only have 9,000 followers, that lets me know that she maybe hasn't grasped social media, or maybe her fans didn't follow her to social media. I don't know what her social media strategy is, but that's pretty low, right? So it would be nice if there was a number, if this say, hey, you get to this many monthly listeners and you get to this many followers and you can have a career in music. It would be nice if we can just say that, but again, everybody's followers are different. Some people have 1 million followers and can't get a single stream on their spot. They can't get them over because they're only there to watch and listen to the shenanigans, right? So everybody's followers and listeners behave differently. But I think just those two things, like the lack of consistency in releasing music and her social media not being that strong, lets me know that there's a disconnect there. So I understand why she's not getting the streams that she needs to make a living in music. I know that was long-winded, but I would love to have her on this podcast or join our live session. So I look forward to that discussion.
Yeah, well, so do I, because I was a fan of hers. I've always been. I was really into down-tempo for a long time. So, yeah, I mean, consistency. Here's a funny story. I had a kid on Twitter send me a message saying, I don't know how you guys sell so many beats. I can't even sell 2 beats. And he was frustrated. And I hear a lot of frustration from producers about that. And a lot of them lash out. A lot of them burn bridges. A lot of them create conspiracy theories and insult the people who they perceive as being more successful as them because they think they must only be successful because they're kissing ass or cheating the system or they're more connected than I am, that kind of thing. And that's one of those vulgar and base but also somewhat human and natural reactions to that level of stress or perceived failure. So I understand it. It's just not the kind of thing you want to say publicly. So anyway, every now and then, if someone's saying something super wild, like I can't sell anything and my beats are better than all of you top selling producers, I might just click on the profile to see what's going on, really. And every time I've ever done that, it's been very clear to me why these folks aren't successful. And so with this kid in particular, he was frustrated that he couldn't sell more than 2 beats. His catalog was 10 beats total. And so I'm saying, you really are comparing yourself to a top seller who has 500 beats on their catalog and you wonder why you're not at their level? And then, plot twist, it turns out that I guess those beats weren't even his. He was just stealing them off of YouTube. So I think someone reported him to BeatStar. It wasn't me. I think somebody reported him. So because right, yeah. So it's and I'm not in any way, shape, or form comparing this guy to Estero at all. Estero is a great artist and a veteran artist at that, and her talent level is crazy. This whole idea, though, of not releasing much content and expecting the small amount of content that you have released carrying your career is, I think, the heart of the conversation. And it's just, unfortunately, not the way things work anymore. I mean, with very few exceptions. I mean, the artists that can release, the Lauryn Hills of the world that can release 1 song every 30 years and people lose their minds, already have their money. They're good. They have their legacy. They have their classic albums. They can tour whenever they want and people will freak out because they had that scarcity model and they were extremely unique. Other artists can't do that. And right. Especially not starting out. If you don't have fans and $5 million sitting in the bank and a classic album already with 5 mics in the annals of hip-hop history, that model's probably not for you. It's just not. So please don't try it.
Yeah. And another thing that she brought up, I think, I'm trying to find it because I never want to misquote people, but essentially she made, a lot of people do this. They say, okay, I have 100,000 streams on this song. what if it wasn't streams and it was downloads, right? That's not fair to do that, right? Just because you have 100,000 streams does not mean 100,000 people would have downloaded your single if they weren't able to stream it, right?
Because it could have been 1,000 people listening 100 times each.
So that, and it could have your song could have just appeared in some of their like Spotify radio. Like there's some, so there's so sometimes your songs get streamed and it wasn't on demand, right? It just appeared in a playlist. Maybe it just appeared in somebody's Spotify radio. Like there's a lot of plays that happen that way. So to assume that somebody would have spent $1 on your track just because it was streamed, to your point, it could be, 100 people listening 1,000 times, which is awesome. But again, it just kind of shuts down the theory that if you have 100,000 plays, it would have been 100,000 downloads in the iTunes, store era, right? So that's not how streaming works. At the end of the day, like I feel like streaming is a good thing. It's a great thing, and it gives you exposure to people that maybe never knew about you. It gives you an opportunity to create new fans because they don't have to pay for your music. They can just try it out, and if they like you, then maybe they will follow you on social media. And there's an opportunity to take that play to an actual follow, to an actual fan that spends money, whether it's merchandise or a crowdfunding campaign. You have an opportunity now. I think it's given a lot more people exposure. So I would love to talk to Estero. I know she also brought up, like, she posted like what the average pay of a Spotify employee was, and I think it's over $100,000.
Oh damn! We need some job applications.
Yeah, but it's a tech company, and that's on par with like other tech companies, right? So again, it's still not a fair comparison. I guess ultimately she was saying like, look, I'm only making 8,000 off my music. These people at Spotify are making 100,000. Like, that's not fair, and that's definitely not an apples to apples comparison.
Say, Dame, you're an artist, right, and you're utilizing Spotify. Obviously, neither of us recommend putting your all into a single platform, right? And or at least thinking that a single platform is going to be the thing to carry your career. How do you incorporate that into your overall strategy? A healthy, well-rounded strategy as an independent artist.
Well, at the end of the day, like every artist is different, right? They're going to have a different revenue mix, right? Some artists do very well streaming and can make a living off streaming alone, right? Some artists have a very creative and dope merch strategy, and merch might be like the biggest piece of their revenue mix, right? And some artists have all of the above, right? They have the merch, they get sponsorship revenue, they get YouTube revenue, they get streaming revenue, they're able to get their songs in television and film. There's a lot of different revenue streams out there, and each artist is going to have kind of a different structure and have a different revenue mix. So you really need to figure out, what your strong suits are, what your strategy is going to be to optimize the revenue mix for yourself. It may not be streaming, right? But you may be good at building relationships with music supervisors, and the type of music that you make fits a lot of the themes of pieces that are made in television and film. And you're consistently, because you're good at the music and you're good at building relationships, that's where a lion's share of your money comes from, right? So I think that artists really need to understand where the revenue is and position themselves accordingly to take advantage of the revenue streams that you feel like you can capitalize on, right? And so it's never like standard advice that I give to an artist. Like, we need to understand more about each of these artists to understand their strong suits and how they can position themselves to be a full-time artist. And this is not an easy thing to do. I want to stress that time and time again. Like, I think most artists just want it to be easy to be an artist, right? And being an artist is something that's in very high demand. There's a shitload of you out there trying to make this happen. And if all it took was 50,000 monthly listeners and 9,000 followers, there would be even more artists that are full-time musicians. Like, to me, it's going to take more than that, you know, depending on what your goals are, right? Like, some people have $100,000 a year. I'll be cool on that. And some people want to be, you know, 5 million a year or what have you. But it's a very difficult career path. And from my perspective, it's going to take more than 50,000 monthly listeners and 9,000 followers. And I see a lot of artists out there that have more than that. That's what gives me the confidence to say that right now is the best time ever in the history of music to be an independent artist. You just have to figure it out. Join our live sessions and listen to our podcast.
Yeah, no, I mean, I post that stuff on YouTube all the time, and it's one of those things that is just a reality of the new music industry. There are so many more revenue streams for creators now than there were before because of the internet. And granted, yeah, they don't pay as much as the performance royalties from an MTV video, but there are more of them. And if you start collecting on all of them, or at least as many as you possibly can, suddenly your overall revenue is going to increase. The fact of the matter is, a lot of artists just don't know, number one, that these streams exist, these streams of income. They don't know how to collect them, and they don't put themselves in a position to collect them consistently and create content that encourages people to generate those revenue streams for them. So it's like you said, it's not easy, but the good thing is it's a habit, and once you figure it out, you figure it out, and then something new comes out, you figure that out too.
And a lot of artists, especially artists that have maybe started, you know, 15, 20 years ago, a lot of them say, well, I don't do social media, or sure, I don't want to do social media because it wasn't a thing that they had to do back then. Well, that's how the game is played these days. You have to be successful to some extent on social media, or it's going to be hard to have a career. So if you tell me that you don't do social media or you can't do social media, then it's going to be a tough road. Like, the game is played differently today than it was 5 years ago, definitely 10 years ago, 15 years ago. That was such a long time ago. It definitely was a different game. So the rules just changed. It's not that it's unfair. You just have to learn the rules of the new game and figure things out.
Well, let's be honest. It was unfair back then, and everybody was talking about how unfair it was. You know, NWA existed back then. TLC existed back then. And right. I think we're looking at, not that those stories don't have two sides or three or four sides, but the point is, there have always been complaints about the industry being unfair and exploitative of artists at any given moment in its era. And now we're in the streaming era. Everybody says that's unfair. Before, we were in the major labels run everything era. You know, people had a lot to say about how evil the major labels were and how unfair that system was.
And I'm not saying that I would be opposed to Spotify paying artists more. Of course, I want them to pay more. You know, because it sounds unfair when you're like, oh, a fraction of a penny. You know, but then when you see like how some of these artists are racking up these streams and it's turning into bigger checks, like looking at it on a per stream basis, you would think, oh yeah, artists are definitely getting taken advantage of. But then when I see the checks that some of these artists are getting because they're able to rack up the streams, I'm like, well, that's a pretty damn good opportunity. But I would never be opposed to artists getting paid more. I wouldn't count on that happening because Spotify claims that it's still not making money. So as long as they're putting, you know, as long as they're in the red, losing money every quarter, they're definitely not going to be looking to pay artists more.
So let me conclude this podcast. Get a job in tech and apply at Spotify. You'll be making 6 figures a year, and then you won't have these problems.
Right.
That's fair to say, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, that's, it's supply and demand these days, man. If you're an engineer, you can apply, get a job at Spotify, and maybe do both, man. Work at Spotify and make music. You can be on the inside, and you can maybe get yourself on some playlists from the inside. I don't know.
And then get on our podcast because we're curious to hear that. So shout out to everyone that's listening on Audiomatic. Shout out to everybody that's listening on Spotify. Shout out to everyone that's listening on Stitcher, Apple, all the platforms. Appreciate you. We are back every single Monday. We're gonna come back with some more hot topics next Monday, and appreciate you listening. Subscribe. Give us a 5-star rating if the platform that you're consuming this podcast on allows. It helps us. MusicEntrepreneurClub.com is the website. You can actually have these conversations with us every single week, a couple times a week, as well as collaborate on beats with me, interact with special guests that Dame has on the MEC, and it's a good and small, intimate music business mentorship program, one that I've never seen anywhere else.